Hello everyone, welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. Today we take a look at one of the most dangerous criminal families to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld, especially in the Everton area. A family that became so notorious that police were forced to create a specialist team in order to try and take back control of the streets in which the gang had taken over. The Gee family were a very notorious crime family that grew up on the dangerous Grizedale estate which can be found in Everton. Darren and Danny Gee were very well known on the estate and part of the larger family which included their other siblings Billy, Ian and Stephen Gee. In particular, out of all the brothers, Daniel and Darren Gee had both become involved in very serious crime at an early age. The brothers made it clear that they wanted to make their mark in the Grizedale estate. In many previous interviews, Darren has explained how the brothers had nothing but a poor experience in the education system, and because of this bad experience, he had been left with no choice but to leave school at the age of 13. By the time the brothers were young adults, Darren explained that most of the Gee family did not have the necessary qualifications or skills that were required to get a decent job, especially one that would support them on the estate. Just a few miles to the north of the city centre, Everton's Grizedale estate had been turned into an extremely dangerous drugs market by the brothers in a quest to make money and gain control. The brothers and their extensive criminal activities left the police with no choice but to task an independent team with the job of taking down the Gee organisation. Ordinary families who wanted no part in crime had no choice but to look the other way as crimes were committed on a daily basis. And once the Gee family realised that the local residents had lost all faith in police, it only got worse. The brothers now terrorised anyone who stood in their way, on their conquest to turn the residential estate of Grizedale into an area that was exempt from the rule of law. The Grizedale estate was home and stomping grounds for the Gee brothers. The crime family enjoyed their status as gang leaders, and it's mostly agreed that the crime gang that polluted Grizedale was led by Darren and Danny Gee, who both had no trouble using extreme violence and intimidation tactics to dominate the backstreets and alleyways in the North Liverpool estate. The brothers were always associated with very serious violence and had also made a lot of money drug dealing. The leading members of the Gee family understood the game and became employers as well as enforcers to people who resided on the estate. The Gee brothers had surrounded themselves with many people that they had grown up with and knew they could trust. The brothers and their criminal gang had reportedly used the profits that they had made from selling drugs in the local community to buy more loyalty, protection and better security. It was also reported that the Gee brothers paid children to be on the street corner rather than go to school. These young foot soldiers were paid large sums of money to give more incentive to be willing to participate in the criminal activities of the gang. The brothers created an extensive criminal network in and around Grizedale estate, one that became so big that many reported it was a common sight to see mums and dads selling drugs around the clock. The worst thing about this was mums and dads would have the kids with them as they tried to sell as much crack and heroin as they possibly could. At the brothers' height in the drugs game, it was reported that the Gees were earning at a very minimum around £20,000 a week from their extensive criminal activities in and around Everton. The police and the local residents all knew that the brothers were running a 24-hour Class A drugs business, and one that was based in the heart of the Grizedale estate. The brothers and their gang would go on to operate around-the-clock drug sales with pay-as-you-go mobile phones being used to take orders, then dispatching outriders on mountain bikes to deliver the product to the customer. Younger kids, who were not yet ready in the eyes of the gang for handling the drugs and large amounts of cash, would instead be offered a chance to be employed for £50 a week to act as lookouts to spot police and rival gang members. It must have been unimaginably difficult for locals who just wanted to live a law-abiding lifestyle and did not want any involvement in the Gee's criminal enterprises. They, in essence, all had become outsiders on their own estate, and the locals were forced to confront the many inherent risks and dangers of living next to some of the country's most dangerous criminals. A survey conducted on behalf of the police had shown that the fear of violence being committed stood at 80% among the law-abiding community on the Grizedale estate. As well as their ability to inflict extreme violence without hesitation, it has also been suggested that the Gee family had also been able to flourish in such a way because of a peculiar situation that allowed them to thrive in the Grizedale estate. Many people describe the Grizedale estate as a place that's removed from the rest of the world. Many presumed that there was another much more organised and higher powered criminal organisation behind the Gee crime family. This theory was especially believed by the police and detectives, who were working in the Gee case. To them it seemed the brothers appeared to be the public front of what was a very violent and extremely sadistic regime. It was clear that the Gees appeared to relish that notoriety that the criminal exploits had earned them, amongst the local community especially, and they liked to be in the thick of the action whenever it occurred. Tit-for-tat shootings became commonplace around the estate, and it was made very clear that nobody was allowed to stand in the way of the brothers' profitable money-making rackets. In 2003, there were simmering tensions between the Gee brothers and a rival faction of drug dealers who were also in operation in the area. But by 2004, the fallout had resulted in a wave of shootouts across the north of Liverpool. On the first day of January 2004, there was a double shooting in the Royal Oak pub in West Derby. One man died from the shooting and another was left fighting for his life. Relations between another local drug boss named William Moore and the Gee's criminal family had deteriorated at a rapid rate. On the evening of the 6th of April 2004, the Gees returned to the Grizedale estate after attending a funeral in Speak. The brothers and the two friends were driving along Robson Street when Darren's younger brother spotted a suspicious car on the street. They stopped the car and reversed to see who was inside. However, upon doing so, they were met by former SAS officer Darren Waterhouse. Mr. Waterhouse was a hitman, and he was hired by the opposing crime boss to take out the rival gang or any of its members. Upon seeing his intended target, Mr. Waterhouse began shooting. He riddled the Ford Galaxy with bullets. However, the intended target, Darren, had just switched seats with his friend Craig Barker, who was only 18 at the time. And to make matters worse, the group was driving a new car they had just brought recently. As this car was a different model to the Galaxy they were used to driving, the group was still getting used to using the new clutch. And as the shooting began, in a rush to escape the shootout, the car was stalled and unfortunately Mr. Barker was left in point blank range of the gunfire. He was consequently hit with many bullets from the hitman. After the shooting had taken place and upon realising that he had shot the wrong target, Mr. Waterhouse made his exit. Darren tried to take Mr. Barker to hospital in the car that had just been shot up, but a bullet had been lodged into the gearbox of the car, and because of this the car was now stuck in second gear. Unable to drive the car above second gear, Darren pulled the car over and stopped another car passing by. The woman who was driving the car pulled over but was met by Darren covered in blood screaming at her to open the car door. She was so scared that she refused to let him in. Darren had no choice but to smash the car window and steal the car so that he could rush his friend to the hospital. But unfortunately, Mr. Barker died of his injuries. Ian Gee, who was driving the vehicle at the time, suffered life-changing injuries. Mark Richardson, another associate of the Gees, suffered a minor wound and managed to escape. Darren Gee, according to intelligence, was thought to have been Mr. Waterhouse's intended target for the shooting, but after unknowingly changing seats with his friend, was very luckily not hurt. Darren recounts that the whole incident is something that will never leave his thoughts, as his best friend Mr. Barker was fatally shot in a case of mistaken identity right in front of him. He even recounted that the bullets were clearly meant for him, as they immediately stopped shooting once they realised they had hit the wrong person. The gunman, Mr. Waterhouse, used to serve with the Coldstream Guards, and was honoured for his highly commendable actions by way of a military cross, and also presented with a Radar People of the Year award. Darren Waterhouse was convicted in 2005 for the murder of Craig Barker and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Darren has always professed his innocence to the crime and still does to this day. The courts found Mr. Waterhouse guilty of being involved in the shooting of Craig Barker. Mr. Waterhouse had admitted he had associates from that area, associates that he had met whilst in prison previously while serving time on a drugs charge. For one reason and another, Mr. Waterhouse became involved in the drug culture, having left the army. While serving his prison sentence, he met his co-defendant, William Moore. Mr. Waterhouse and Mr. Moore became very good friends, and had even associated outside of the prison environment. William had a brother called John, who had explained to Mr. Waterhouse that there appeared to be some discontent with a notorious family that was competing for control of the drugs market, the Gees in Liverpool. On the night Mr. Barker was killed, Mr. Waterhouse had agreed to attend Liverpool to see William. He travelled up in his own car using his own mobile phone to keep in contact with William and taking his dog with him. The prosecution alleges that Mr. Waterhouse attended Liverpool as a contract killer and that Darren Gee was the intended victim, not Craig. The shooting occurred on Robson Street on the Grizedale estate in Everton on April 6, 2004. Craig was in a car with three of his friends, Darren Gee, Ian Gee and Mark Richardson. The driver of the car was usually Darren Gee, the one whom Mr. Moores was having trouble with. Darren Gee has just got in the back of the car as he was playing with a new computer game that he had just installed, so Craig was now the driver. The group were driving around the Everton area when a man jumped out of a car and opened fire on the Galaxy they were sitting in. Shots were fired all over the car in what was described as an uncontrolled manner. Craig was shot several times as he scrambled around in the car in an attempt to escape. 2 passengers received no injuries, and one, Darren Gee, received injuries to his leg and thigh. The gunman left the scene in his car, which was later discovered burnt out. The police attended the scene and all parties refused to cooperate with the police. Later that evening, Craig died from his injuries. Later on, further statements were obtained from the other occupants of the car. Darren Gee had described the gunman as having red or ginger hair and looking like a male wearing an alpine hat. Mr. Waterhouse was arrested in Luton at his home address. Whilst at the police station, Mr. Waterhouse was asked to cooperate in an identification parade, to which he consented. The identification suite was new at Luton police station, and Mr. Waterhouse had been arrested with no clothing on his upper body. It was a hot summer's day at the time, and the police ID suite at the time did not have any clothing to offer Mr. Waterhouse to wear, but the officer investigating the crime had a spare t-shirt that he had brought to work with him that day. The t-shirt was taken to and worn by Mr. Waterhouse on the ID parade. It was a video parade. The t-shirt was navy coloured, and the other volunteers in the parade were specifically selected around this, as well as a few with navy coloured t-shirts to blend in with the t-shirt Mr. Waterhouse had been given to wear. By the time the video had made its way up to Liverpool, the volunteers had been changed by the inspector as he found them not to be suitable, and the volunteers who were wearing a navy t-shirt had now been removed. The video was thereafter shown to 3 occupants of the car, who had now changed their minds and decided to cooperate with the police about the shooting. Ian picked out Mr. Waterhouse from the video parade, albeit in his statement he said, "I didn't see him fire or what was firing because I ducked down straight away, and I can only recall both were white males, and that's it really. I don't recall any clothing, ages or sizes, it all happened too fast and my head was down in my lap area." The others did not make an identification. An anonymous witness who stood approximately 12 feet from the junction phoned the police and gave a description of the gunman as wearing a balaclava hat cricket style and coveralls and gloves on. Mr. Waterhouse was charged with the murder, along with William and John Moore. During the trial, it emerged that Craig's mother had given the police a list of several names that she believed were responsible for killing her son, and all the names on this list have since been shot and killed. There was also another male who was ginger-haired from the area, and someone who had a fractured relationship with the Gees. This same male had secured his alibi, as he was in an off-license around the time of the shooting, where his girlfriend worked, and he secured the CCTV footage from the shop and lodged it with his solicitors before he had even been arrested or questioned. Mr. Waterhouse suggested to the court that that is slightly strange behaviour for someone who has nothing to do with the crime. Mr. Waterhouse accepted that he was in Liverpool that night, but on the basis that he was not there to shoot or kill anyone. During his trial, an ex-soldier who served with Mr. Waterhouse attended the trial to give character references. The ex-soldier was now a serving police officer and stated to the court that Mr. Waterhouse was an expert in using firearms. In his personal opinion, an uncontrolled shooting of this nature was not in Mr. Waterhouse's style, or in fact, for that matter, how the pair had been trained to shoot by the special forces. All military personnel had been taught to execute a double tap when shooting to kill in the army. A double tap is when 2 shots are fired to the chest and 2 shots are fired to the head, and the ex-soldier wanted to make clear that the courts, in a way without sounding like boasting too much, that Mr. Waterhouse was way too much of a professional and had too much expertise to shoot in such a haphazard way. However, regardless of this statement, Darren Waterhouse and William Moore were both convicted by the jury and sentenced to serve 30 years in prison each. The CPS proceeded to have another trial with William's brother John Moore, who then decided to change his plea to guilty on the basis that he knew harm was going to be caused to an individual, but not harm which would result in death. Some years after the conviction, Mr. Waterhouse claims Darren Gee sent him a Christmas card, and inside the card was allegedly a note from Darren stating that his brother had been able to pick Mr. Waterhouse out on the ID parade as the police had told him what t-shirt Mr. Waterhouse was wearing in the picture. A statement was taken from Darren Gee by the solicitor representing Mr. Waterhouse regarding this incident. Mr. Waterhouse also claims that during the disclosure of the trial, the CPS refused to disclose the 999 call that was made during the shooting. The judge said it did not assist the defence or undermine the prosecution case enough to be used in court. It was alleged that Mark Richardson had phoned 999 when the car was under attack, and within this recording there are specific questions that the operator asks, especially in particular to descriptions of suspects that are attacking. Based on this new evidence, an application was made to the Court of Appeal, the COA, on behalf of Mr. Waterhouse, who considered that this new evidence from Darren Gee should be enough evidence to warrant a retrial. However, the Court of Appeal dismissed the application, stating that Darren Gee was not a credible witness and could not be believed. An argument was presented by John Cooper, QC, acting on behalf of Mr. Waterhouse, that the 999 call that was made during the attack was highly relevant in light of this new indication for an appeal. The Courts of Appeal refused to see any reference under the new evidence and did not agree the 999 calls that were made under extreme duress should be disclosed. Darren Waterhouse argues that if the 999 call does not undermine the prosecution or assist the defence, then why is it that this recording has not been disclosed? The solicitors who work for Mr. Waterhouse stated that in most cases the 999 transcripts are served, especially during such a high profile trial. Darren Waterhouse is adamant the 999 tape recording will prove his innocence. Mr. Waterhouse believes this is a complete miscarriage of justice. His defence is that he is a highly trained soldier who, according to the prosecution's case, could not carry out a contract killing on the right victim, used his own car and phone, and had to spray a car with 9 bullets from 3 feet away. The very same man was awarded the Military Cross for bravery and leadership and served 14 years, most of which he was an instructor in weapons tactics. He also served on covert ops for the SAS. The prosecution suggested that Mr. Waterhouse received money for the killing, but stated there was no evidence that funds had ever come from William Moore. Mr. Waterhouse explained that he did have money around him at the time, but that was from cultivating cannabis. The police said that the crop he was currently growing when arrested had not come to its fruition, and served an account statement from the electricity company which showed money had been put on the electricity meter from November 17, 2003 to January 22, 2004 in the sum of £210. After the court case, his defence team managed to obtain a full electricity statement which showed that £1,650 worth of electricity had been used from July 2004 and a full crop of cannabis had been grown by this stage, contrary to what the police/prosecution suggested. However, regardless of Darren Waterhouse's complaints, he remains in jail to this day for the contract murder of Craig Barker. In 2005, William Moore, who was 45 at the time, and Darren Waterhouse, who was 39 at the time, were both jailed for life for the Craig Barker murder after a trial at Liverpool Crown Court. The 2004 summer shooting was the explosive climax of a North Liverpool drugs war that rocked the area. David Regan, who was 36 at the time, was blasted 3 times in the back and legs at the car wash that he owned on Prescott Road, Old Swan, on May 18, 2004. Mr. Regan was thought to have been shot after he was wrongly blamed for the murder of Craig Barker, and also what Darren Gee believed was in fact an attempt on his own life, one that had gone wrong during a North Liverpool drug war. Darren said he plotted the murder after being wrongly told that Mr. Regan was behind the attack on him. Darren also explains that when he was given this information about Mr. Regan, he was not in the right frame of mind and that those around him did not pull him to the side and tell him to think about what he was doing, but instead encouraged him to take revenge. Darren Gee was arrested for the crime and admitted to his part in the murder and was placed on remand to await sentencing. Darren was originally facing a recommended minimum of 35 years under the current sentencing guidelines, as his legal team seen his crime as borderline contract killing. Whilst on remand and awaiting sentence, Darren had accepted in his mind that a sentence of 30 to 35 years was on the horizon, and he had prepared himself mentally to spend the rest of his life in jail. However, on the day of sentencing, something that nobody was expecting happened. When Darren appeared before the court for sentencing, the judge told him that as his crimes were committed pre-2004, Mr. Gee would now be sentenced under the old law. And because of this, it now gave the judge 2 choices. A discretionary life sentence if the judge felt Darren would continue to be violent or had a history of violence which was increasing. A sentence where he would not be released until parole approved him being released. Or a fixed long-term determinate sentence. This could be imposed if the judge felt Darren could in fact change if given a second chance to start his life, where he would be given a release date. The judge looked at Darren's criminal record, and upon seeing there was only one previous charge of violence, this was for threatening to blow up a prison officer's car, but as this threat was never actually carried out, The judge ultimately decided to give Darren another chance, and so Darren Gee was sentenced to 18 years in prison after being found guilty of conspiracy to murder at Manchester Crown Court in 2006. During Darren Gee's years in prison, he has described how he has seen and was many times part of more criminal activities, and has even told the story of how he was caught having a sexual relationship with a nurse whilst incarcerated. Darren Gee claims a nurse who was working at the prison, Jane Jackson, was caught topless in a private treating room with himself at HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes. The Category A prison, which was dubbed Britain's Alcatraz, houses some of the country's most dangerous criminals, including rapists, murderers and terrorists. Miss Jackson had jammed a mop under the door of the treatment room and stripped off in front of the inmate Mr. Gee. The Nursing and Midwifery Council panel had ruled that a nurse had in fact had an inappropriate and highly sexually motivated relationship with a prisoner whilst at work. Miss Jackson's fitness to practice was found to be impaired because of the misconduct she had taken part in, and she was struck off because of the incident. Paul Morris, who was chairing the hearing, said, "It was quite clear that Miss Jackson had not provided a high standard of practice at all times whilst working, and had acted without any integrity or had respect to uphold the reputation of the profession, especially of those who work with vulnerable people." The hearing found that Miss Jackson had failed to establish and maintain professional boundaries with the prisoner that she was meant to be providing care for, and also found that Miss Jackson was in breach of her obligations as a nurse, which when mounted together amounted to Miss Jackson taking part in very serious professional misconduct. Her flagrant disregard of policy seriously undermines the risk of security, and not only to herself and colleagues who she works with, but the security of the entire prison and its population. Her misconduct carried an unwarranted amount of risk of harm, and brought the whole medical profession, especially those who work within the prison system, into major disrepute. It was reported that Miss Jackson was caught out on February 7, 2009, when a prison guard, Rebecca Langley, had burst into the treatment room during her fling with Mr. Gee. Her top half was naked as she was holding her bra and staff tunic in her hand, said Barry Dooley for the NMC. A sobbing Miss Jackson was taken straight to the prison governor's office and suspended for her actions before being marched off the premises. Miss Jackson admitted to breaking strict regulations by being alone with a prisoner, and also further breaking the regulations by taking off her clothes. But Miss Jackson had claimed it was a one-off, and she said that she had been pressured into the act by the inmate, and only committed the misconduct as she was fearing for her life. Miss Jackson told how Mr. Gee had said, "Let me into the treatment room," and he's had this horrible look on his face. She said, "I just froze and panicked and then very stupidly opened the door." She added during the hearing that she opened the door like a robot, adding that the prisoner had the remote control of my body. "At least that's how I felt." HMP Woodhill is one of the country's maximum security prisons, housing inmates that have committed some of the most serious crimes. But Mr. Dooley, who was in charge of overseeing the hearing, stated, "If Miss Jackson was so scared and feared for her life in the way she described, then why would she open a locked door and go in with a prisoner simply based on just a scary look? She did not call out for help at any stage, although she knew that there were prison officers nearby. She even admitted to another member of staff she had put the mop across the door for extra privacy." Miss Jackson had previously said to another officer that she had strong feelings for the prisoner. "I knew deep down that I was a professional and he was a prisoner." It was also suggested that Miss Jackson just threw her keys to the prison doors on a chair during her time with the prisoner, putting the entire security of the jail at risk, the hearing was told. "Being in a confined space with a prisoner means that you have potentially put at risk the entire establishment," said Hannah Pugliese, a senior manager with Milton Keynes Primary Care Trust, which provides medical care at the jail. "You could have been held hostage, you could be at very serious risk, especially in that particular environment," she says. Miss Jackson had already confessed to breaching strict security by smuggling a Lynx deodorant and Radoc shower gel into the jail for the prisoner in January 2009. "Very stupidly I brought toiletries in just to shut him up," Miss Jackson said. "I knew it was absolutely wrong, but I still did it." The contraband items were found in his cell following Miss Jackson's suspension, adding weight to the NMC's case that Miss Jackson had not just had a momentary fling with a random prisoner, but that it was in fact much more serious and a sexual relationship with one particular prisoner. Mr. Gee worked in the prison laundry along the corridor from Miss Jackson's office, and would regularly chat to the nurse on his way back to the cells. Miss Jackson also denied that the 2 drug cabinets that were located in her treatment room were left open during her encounter with the prisoner, a claim that was later rejected by the panel. Miss Jackson was fired by the Health Trust on July 9, 2009, following a lengthy and in-depth internal investigation. After serving his time, and now in his 40s, Darren Gee was released from prison. Darren had mentioned in interviews and to the newspapers that he organised Mr. Regan's murder because he wrongly believed that he was involved in the murder of his best friend, Craig Barker. Darren said that he felt guilty over the deaths of Mr. Regan and Craig Barker. He said that his friend Craig was not involved in any serious crimes and that he died that day because of his casual association with the Gees. Darren also explains that he has tried to reach out to the families of those who have been affected with his actions, but it seems unsurprisingly that not everyone is ready to forgive and forget everything that has happened. Nicky Regan, who spoke on behalf of the Regan family, had this to say: "The murder of David Regan in 2004 destroyed our family. We were left isolated and vulnerable. So-called friends disappeared, but that's what happens when a loved one is shot dead." There was a long and complicated court process which led up to the conviction of Darren Gee. We were subject to threats and intimidation throughout the trial. The Regan family has struggled to forgive Darren Gee for the role that he played in organising David's cold-blooded murder. But we do not want or seek revenge. We are painfully aware that nothing good can ever come from acts of revenge or violence. It only ruins more lives. Our message is that the Regan family wishes to be left alone, and especially left alone by Darren Gee. He will know what we mean by that. He is active on social media and often posts content which we object to. He appears to hold a grudge of sorts against our family, and we objected to seeing him boasting about chopping heads off on television and on the internet. Surely this was not necessary. After Darren Gee left prison, he was released into a different world, and has explained how at times he felt so depressed and angry that he himself would have very bad thoughts of taking his own life. But one time whilst having these bad thoughts, he saw a campaign for "choose a life and not a knife," and said the message hit him hard. It was at this point Darren decided to focus all his energy into something completely different. He decided that he would devote his time to help others not make the same mistake in life that he had made. From that point on, Darren became a prolific anti-knife campaigner, and has spoken of his regret he has felt, especially over the years of his life that he wasted on gangland violence. Darren joined the knife crime charity, the Ben Kinsella Trust, which educates young people on the dangers of knife crime and helps them to make positive choices in life to stay safe. The trust also campaigns for the action and justice of those who are already affected by knife crime, and their campaigns have won numerous awards in recognition of their success. The Ben Kinsella Trust is a trust which campaigns for change, challenging government, businesses and society to ensure everyone takes responsibility for tackling knife crime. However, now becoming a social media sensation and maybe not realising that he was under the watch and scrutiny of millions of people who were touched by his experience, Darren Gee was removed from the charity after threatening to destroy a podcast host in an online bust-up. The charity had been alerted to inappropriate language used in a public forum and explained that this conduct was contrary to their values and ethics. The charity referenced several articles that were published online, which reported Darren Gee threatening James English, who hosts the podcast Anything Goes. Darren and Mr. English began to clash in a public disagreement, which saw the pair claiming each other had been used by the other to gain publicity online after Darren had appeared on Anything Goes 3 times for interviews. It had also been reported that Mr. Gee was uncomfortable with the later appearance of Marvin Herbert on the podcast. Mr. Gee has also reportedly said himself that he declined to appear on Anything Goes alongside a prison guard. At the time of the bust-up, Mr. Gee had posted a series of posts on Instagram saying "he's a rat," referring to James English. "I classed him as a friend for a very long time. You've tried to stab me in the back and this isn't a game, you effing ballbag." He also posted that he elevated Mr. English's podcast to a whole new level by suggesting that he helped Mr. English secure 100,000 subscribers in a few months. Mr. English responded by removing all 3 podcast episodes he had conducted with the ex-gangster from his platforms, and said he would not be re-uploading them until he received an apology. In 2008, Liverpool Crown Court was told how Jamie Starkey fired at Danny Gee after claiming his family suffered months of violence and death threats. Danny Gee, it was said, cruised around the Grizedale estate in a chauffeur-driven £60,000 Range Rover, whilst children he had recruited to work for him delivered drugs on bikes to the local addicts. Lawyers for Mr. Starkey alleged Danny Gee's gang had thrown bricks at the Starkey's home, rammed his brother's car off the road, and repeatedly threatened his relatives in their day-to-day lives. On one occasion, criminal associates of Danny Gee and his gang were said to have smashed every window at Mr. Starkey's home, covering his 4-year-old sister in glass and leaving his family in even more fear. Days before the shooting of Danny Gee took place, it's claimed Danny had kidnapped one of Mr. Starkey's friends and imprisoned him in a derelict house, where a gang had beaten and stoned him for his friendship to Mr. Starkey. On New Year's Eve, Mr. Starkey had been out celebrating in Everton with friends, when he encountered one of Danny Gee's criminal associates, who threatened to shoot him. The youngster fled the scene to a nearby derelict property on his road. It was here that Mr. Starkey received a Colt revolver that was hidden inside. During a 15-minute confrontation outside a pub at 5 AM the following morning, witnesses heard Danny Gee threatening Mr. Starkey's family and goading Mr. Starkey to shoot him. At one point, Danny Gee told Mr. Starkey, "Shoot me now or I'm going to go and kill your mother." Mr. Starkey felt he was left with no other choice as a way to protect his family and fired. One of the bullets went into Danny Gee's stomach, which pierced his lung and went straight out of his back. He was taken to the hospital but refused treatment. 4 days later, Danny Gee was arrested for masterminding a city centre drugs conspiracy and was subsequently jailed for 7.5 years for his part in the drugs plot in June 2008. Mr. Starkey was also jailed in October 2008 after he admitted wounding Mr. Gee with intent and possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. It emerged following the shooting Danny Gee had sent a text message to Mr. Starkey offering not to speak to police in exchange for £20,000. But it was also revealed to the courts that Mr. Gee was plotting revenge on Mr. Starkey within hours of being injured. When a policeman went to speak to Danny Gee about his injuries, Mr. Gee said, "I fell over, mate," and then winked at the officer, but added, "Don't worry though, I'll get the little C word that did this to me." Mr. Gee then made a call to Mr. Starkey's mobile just hours after returning home from the hospital after being shot. Danny Gee is alleged to have said, "All be ready, cause one of yours is gonna get killed. We're not going to go in there, you stupid little tools. You haven't got a clue. We're going to go to one of your girls' mas or anything first. You little wankers, they're going to go first." Also adding, "We're going to deal with every one of them until we get all of you." Police, who by that time had bugged his plush flat in an attempt to trap him over his drug deals, had also managed to obtain recorded phone calls which showed Danny Gee conspiring to buy guns and threatening to kill Mr. Starkey. Police officers and detectives working the case overheard Mr. Gee plotting revenge against Mr. Starkey and referring to a .45 and a Mac-10 machine gun. In a conversation with his partner, Danny Gee was overheard saying, "Don't worry, the little fucker is going. The only place he is safe is in jail, and he won't be safe there. It'll be even worse in there. Then when he is out, I'll slit his fucking throat." The next day he is alleged to have said on the phone, "Pick me in for 12 guns, I'll buy the lot of them." And in another conversation the court heard, "We're going lad, we're going big time, right through the front door, right through the back door, and bring this family down. Kids, whatever, it's all fine lad, see you soon lad." In 2010, Danny Gee was found guilty of 2 counts of threats to kill and another of 2 of blackmail, and he was told to serve a minimum of 4.5 years, which was to run concurrently with the term that he was already serving for drug dealing. Danny Gee's barrister, Stuart Lawson Rogers QC, told Liverpool Crown Court that his client had only conspired to arm himself because he feared another confrontation with the Starkey family. QC Rogers claimed that Mr. Gee had been targeted by the police because of his underworld family name and revealed to the court that his client's greatest fear was receiving an indefinite sentence, an IPP, because Mr. Gee believed he would never be released from prison again. Judge Henry Globe QC told the courts, "I am in absolutely no doubt that the public must be protected from you, now and in the future." He also said, "In my opinion, I really do not know when it will be safe to release you to the public again." He ordered the very well built and extremely intimidating Danny Gee to serve a minimum of 4 years behind bars before his case can go before the parole board. But he also said the sentence will run at the same time as the 7.5 year sentence he is currently serving for drug offences. Mr. Gee's partner, Kelly Wallace, had wept in the public gallery as Mr. Gee was led down. Danny Gee was found guilty of 2 counts of threats to kill and another 2 of blackmail at a trial. But jurors were unable to agree on the 2 more serious charges of conspiracy to murder and the conspiracy to possess a firearm and ammunition. Jamie Starkey was only 16 when he shot and wounded Daniel Gee at a point-blank range during a 5 AM New Year's Day standoff outside a pub. He served 3.5 years out of a 7-term sentence before being released in September 2011. Shortly after being released from prison and telling officers that he feared for his life, upon release from prison at around 8 PM on Sunday night, Mr. Starkey was walking to his car outside his home in Fazakerley in Liverpool when a hitman dressed in dark clothing approached Mr. Starkey and cut him down in a hail of bullets. the hitman ran off across the playing field, leaving Mr. Starkey to die. Merseyside police went to interview Danny Gee in jail, where he's serving an intermediate prison term, or IPP, for threatening to kill Mr. Starkey in a revenge attack. Chief Superintendent John Ward of Merseyside Police said this was a cold-blooded, calculated shooting of a 21-year-old man who had recently been released from prison after shooting another male on New Year's Day 2008. There is no doubt that this was a targeted shooting, and whoever did this meant to kill Jamie Starkey. We believe that some members of the criminal fraternity will know who did this, and will know what lies behind it, and I would appeal to them to contact us. Jamie Starkey was just 21 years old, and should have been looking forward to his future, but he chose a path which ultimately led to his death. 5 men were arrested in connection to the murder, but to this day the crime is still unsolved. Merseyside Police said it is committed to tackling gun crime and taking offenders off the street, and can reassure residents that they are doing everything in their power to find those responsible for this shooting. Danny Gee, it has been reported, was known as someone who cannot control his anger, not even half as much as Darren. Many ex-prison officers on YouTube who have worked in prisons that he was locked up in have compared him to Charlie Bronson. Both Charlie and Danny are known for their physical strength, but also being trapped in a system with no sight of being released anytime soon. Many even believe that the prison service created Danny Gee and have moulded him into the new notorious prisoner to take Bronson's place after his numerous prison stunts and experience in the prison system since a young lad. Many stories that have given to us recently about Danny Gee are from his brother Darren, or have been recounted by Neil Samworth, who served as a Manchester prison guard for 11 years, and has now left the prison service and decided to tell his story online in podcasts. Mr. Samworth describes Danny Gee as someone who has little to no respect for the prison guards, who are tasked with a job of looking after him whilst being locked up. Danny was described as standing about 6'2", with having a thick neck and thick wrists, and was known to be extremely powerful. He was categorised as a 1%er in the prison system. This is someone that has brought and can reignite at any time huge problems to the entire prison and its population. Mr. Samworth explained that Danny Gee was a prisoner who was always in the segregation unit or place that is otherwise known as a solitary confinement. Recalling one particular incident when Danny Gee had smashed his cell up, it triggered 10 officers to get all padded up and try to confront him about his behaviour. However, Danny was in a very violent mood and single-handedly beat up each one of them as they entered the room to confront him. Mr. Samworth explains how Danny Gee pulled helmets off the officers' heads, pushed them down and even dealt many of them vicious blows. Following this incident, Danny Gee was moved to a special cell, one that was stripped bare with nothing except a wooden bucket that was to be used as a toilet. In April 2014, a hitman gunned down a member of the Gee family, Ian Gee, in the middle of a residential street in a drive-by shooting. Ian Gee was found lying in a pool of blood by a passing paramedic response car. Ian had been shot twice in the leg on a previous occasion when he was in the car during an attempt on his brother Darren's life. However, it's also believed that Ian survived this attack and went on to be a very close associate of Danny and Darren Gee in their drug business. William Gee, better known as Billy, was found unresponsive at his parents' home on Maryport Close, Everton, on February 19, 2016. Billy was last seen alive at 1 AM that morning after leaving a pub where he had been drinking with his mum. Billy, who was only 38, had a medical history of epilepsy, drug overdoses and alcohol abuse. It was reported that he had taken cocaine and 6 bottles of Copperberg cider before he died. Stephen Gee in 2017 reportedly targeted a 77-year-old victim and burgled him. Stephen Gee was arrested after an incident in Cotsbrook Road, Norris Green, on the evening of Friday, July 7, 2017. Mr. Gee admitted to robbing the elderly man's car keys and car in court. It was revealed by the court that Stephen Gee's past convictions include violence, assault, public disorder, theft and criminal damage and robbery. In another later incident, Mr. Gee was handed a 2-year antisocial behaviour order, banning him from entering parts of North Liverpool in July 2009. Just weeks after being given the ASBO order, Mr. Gee carried out 2 more burglaries, for which he was jailed by a judge for 33 months in February 2010. It was reported that this time Stephen Gee took advantage of the 2 women while they were distracted working in the shops by stealing their purses. After the second raid, he was chased by police and jumped from a flyover, but was tracked down by the police force's helicopter. Desmond Lennon, defending in court, said Stephen Gee had been homeless and desperate at the time and suffered from acute dyslexia. Stephen Gee was released on licence, but then went on to run and was returned to jail in June 2011 after stealing from a car. Darren Gee has come home from spending 12 years in jail to a completely different world and no family support, but has quickly adapted to the new world and become a social media sensation. After spending such a substantial amount of time locked up in prison conditions and having to endure the experiences that he grew up with, it will inevitably take him a while to readjust fully to society and his freedom. However, regardless of personal opinions about Darren, he has, no matter what has been thrown at him, remained focused on spreading his message of choose a life, not a knife, and Calnac UK. With all the life experience that Darren has gained, be it inside or outside the UK criminal justice system, along with his self-described and very traumatic upbringing, Darren Gee is now in a position where he is now fortunately equipped with more than enough knowledge and life experience to educate and share wisdom with those who might be headed down a wrong path or thinking of making a bad or wrong life-changing decision. In his journey to change his own mindset, whilst also being in the process of trying to help others change and become more positive to make the right choices in life, we wish him the best of luck. The Gee family, the crimes they committed, and the reputation that they earned will never be forgotten about in the UK criminal underworld. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.